great occasion. At General Assembly last summer, I attended a workshop. It was called Saying Yes by Saying No. And the gist of it was to figure out where your passion and your gifts meet and devote yourself more fully to that particular cause or purpose or vocation by saying no to all the other things you also care about and trusting others to take care of them for you. Okay. I majored in economics as a tool to make the world a better place. I organized the League of Women Voters in Clemson at the age of 28. I served as president of a lot of organizations and always tried to make them operate more democratically. I joyfully discovered when I became a UU 28 years ago, the democratic process was a core value for UUs. So, what do you think my mission and purpose in life seems to be? I'm also currently the co-president of the League of Women Voters of South Carolina, which forces me to be nonpartisan. And I have to tell you, that is not easy. Our fifth principle is the use of the democratic process in our congregations and society at large. Others might ask what democracy has to do with religion. We define ourselves by the values we believe in: justice, love, kindness, compassion, generosity, respect, reverence. These are shared values that we affirm and worship and try to live in our daily lives. Democracy, where each voice is heard and no one voice counts more than any other, is one of those shared values. Unitarian historian Holley Ulbrich says that our faith tradition has been defined since its formation in the 15th century by three key values: freedom, reason, and tolerance. The freedom to choose what we believe to be the sources of meaning and wisdom, and the freedom to build communities of people who share that commitment to freedom of belief. The reliance on reason to work out how we are together and what our meaning and purpose and vision is, rather than having it imposed by others. Tolerance, today we would upgrade the word to acceptance, is a willingness to accept and respect others regardless of differences, and to value and embrace diversity rather than trying to stamp it out. Belief in those three values has held us together since the radical Reformation of the 16th century. And it shouldn't be lost on any of us that these defining values are not just the values of Unitarian Universalism, but they're also the values of political and religious democracy. According to a 1997 report by the UUA Commission on Appraisal, quote, "We need a new or renewed doctrine of the church, an understanding of religious community that is integral, not incidental to our total theological understanding. Otherwise, the church is a club for our kind of people. And it matters little whether you think it is a debating club, a social club, or a political club. When we say we agree to govern ourselves in accordance with the principles of congregational polity, we affirm the moral and spiritual values that we believe this form of governance expresses. Central among those values is the freedom of people to form self-determining, egalitarian, and democratic religious communities. If we are deeply committed to congregational polity, it is because its beliefs and values are central to our liberal faith." End quote. That's a mouthful. Congregational polity is church speak for democracy in the church. The nature of that democracy is defined in a covenant. For us, covenant replaces creed as how we define ourselves. We define ourselves not by what we say, but by how we act, and particularly how we relate to one another, to the sacred, and to the earth. Covenant is an ancient concept that comes from sources both religious and secular. The Jews had a covenant with God. Until modern times, most covenants, including the Jewish one, were between unequal partners. The senior partner dictated the terms and undertook certain responsibilities in exchange. Ancient covenants were usually written by the king or the emperor or the dictator or whoever. And basically they said, "These are my rules. You follow them, I'll take care of you. Not that different from feudalism, where there was the king and the lord and the peasants and the serfs, and all kind of tied together by a hierarchical set of rules. But this kind of political and religious covenant changed with the Protestant Reformation. The printing press was invented in the 1400s, and it was the beginning of the end of the one-sided covenant. After millennia of being ruled by empires and feudal lords, access to the printed word made knowledge democratic. That knowledge led some radicals to say, we don't need Rome, corrupt, greedy, bossy, to run our churches. The Reformation was born. But if Rome was no longer in charge of our religion, who is? Well, guess who filled the gap? Kings, dukes, bishops. Still hierarchy, they just didn't report to Rome. In those places, the government appointed the bishops and collected taxes to support the churches, and they told people what church they could attend, the established churches. In England, torn by religious wars, the government said everybody has to attend the Church of England. There was a severe fine for not attending church, but dissent flourished anyway. Germany was made up of many independent states that weren't unified until the mid-19th century. And there the rule was in elegant Latin, cuius regio, eius religio. That means it's up to the guy in charge. His kingdom, his religion. If your prince is Lutheran, you're Lutheran. If your prince is Catholic, you're Catholic. And it was pretty hard to move. Other places, however, came up with different answers to that question. In Transylvania, the world's only Unitarian king proclaimed not one, but 4 established tax-supported churches: Catholic, Lutheran, Reformed, and Unitarian. Yes, we were established, briefly. Or whatever else, you could go someplace else. There was no penalty, just that the government wouldn't pay for it. You have to pay for yourself. In Amsterdam, heresies and sects flourished once the nation broke free of Spanish domination. France became more tolerant after the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre of the Protestants. And still other places like Spain, Italy, and Poland, there was dissent, sometimes suppressed by the Counter-Reformation and the Inquisition, but still alive and well underground. These dissenters are our religious ancestors. Michael Servetus, or as Tom would prefer I say, Miguel Servito, from Spain, burned at the stake in Geneva for denying the Trinity. Faustus Socinus, or Socini if you want an Italian, who brought his liberal religious ideas from northern Italy to Eastern Europe and is the institutional father of Unitarianism. Transylvanian King John Sigmund, who converted to Unitarianism and made it an established religion, and appointed Unitarian Francis David to be his court preacher. Radicals like Servetus and Socinus didn't want to stop with changing who runs the show. They also challenged being told what to believe. Many leaders of the Reformation, Calvin, Luther, and others, they stuck with Orthodox theology. They just changed who was in charge. But the radicals, that's us, thought otherwise. How do we know if we're believing what we need to be in order to be saved and go to heaven? Is there even a heaven to go to? The Bible was the standard source for answers, but who interprets the Bible? Servetus read it and found no Trinity. The Radical Reformation included all of those who thought there was room for different readings of the Bible, different beliefs and practices. They thought we could listen to each other and to our inner voices and figure out what we valued, what we believed to be true, and that it didn't have to be the same for everybody. Unitarians, Bocamils, Quakers, Anabaptists, Lollards, Huguenots, Mennonites, and Moravians. That list, Unitarians, starts to sound normal. But these were our comrades in rethinking what we believe and how we worship. So our faith tradition is answer to both questions: who's in charge, and how do we decide what matters, what gives meaning to us, what's important. Because they're connected, because the same people who told you what to believe were the ones who were running the churches. So today I just want to focus on the process part. How did we become a faith tradition whose congregations were self-governing and worked out those answers for themselves? Now, like some of you, our minister, Terry, likes to think of himself primarily as a Universalist because it grows out of her Methodist heritage. I think of myself primarily as a Unitarian because of my New England congregational heritage. Unitarianism may have originated in Europe, but in America, that side of our faith tradition was shaped largely in New England. The first covenant in North America was among the Pilgrims. They were English dissenters in the Mayflower Compact. By the way, they thought they were Virginia, but eventually they figured it out. So here's what they said. Fortunately, I'm not reading you the spelling because it's odd spelling. In the presence of God and one another, we covenant to combine ourselves together into a civil body politic for our better ordering and preservation, and do enact, constitute, and frame such just and equal laws, ordinances, acts, constitutions, and officers from time to time, as shall be thought most meet and convenient for the general good of the colony, unto which we promise all due submission and obedience. End quote. So the basis for Plymouth Colony was democracy. Now, 10 years later, the Puritans showed up. They arrived in Boston, and they just wanted to clean up the Church of England. But as time passed, they realized that England was far away, and its established church was really not interested in being cleaned up. So they joined forces with the less numerous Pilgrims to create their own kind of church. The Cambridge Platform of 1848 created the Congregational Church, which affirmed a shared belief in religious democracy. Sorry, 1648. That was a little off there. That big typo. And the word they used to describe this church democracy was covenant. That covenantal denomination was my mother's religious heritage. Many of the old Unitarian churches in New England, along with the South's Mother Unitarian Church in Charleston, were established originally as congregational churches. And while we have diverged from them on matters of theology, we have continued to share their faith in congregational polity and church democracy. And we run into a lot of covenants in our life. I think of the preamble to the Constitution as a covenant that states our mission and purpose as a nation, and how we all consent to it by agreeing to support the Constitution that spells out the details. Now, if I know that Jorge promised to uphold the Constitution, because he's a naturalized citizen, and I promised to uphold the Constitution when I became a member of Clemson City Council. The rest of you, we just assume since you're born here and didn't leave, that you also support the Constitution. So if you're born here, you're stuck with it. If you're naturalized, you have to agree to support it. And we can change it, but not easily and probably not by executive order. All right, that's as close as partisan as I can get. My homeowners association has covenants that come with the property, things you can and cannot do, like what color you can paint your trim. Those were agreed to by the original inhabitants, and they're still binding on us today, although we've managed to sort of wiggle around some of them to suit changing needs. For example, we are now allowed to have pickup trucks. That was a big step forward. Marriage is also a covenant with reciprocal rights and obligations stated in the vows as well as the laws governing marriage. I used to occasionally say to my husband now, because he was very absent-minded, I'd say, well, you know, in our marriage vows you did agree to take out the garbage, and he would look at me with some doubt, but then he would take out the garbage. But while contracts are enforceable in court, covenants face the challenge of unenforceable obligations. Any kind of covenanted community, whether a marriage or a friendship or a congregation or a homeowners association, depends mainly on goodwill rather than on penalties to adhere to the covenant. At the UUA level, and remember the UUA does not tell us what to do. They try, but we don't pay a lot of attention to it when they do. But they have a covenant too. And that covenant is spelled out in the principles and sources that bind congregations to each other. At the beginning of the principles, it says, quote, "We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote," and then it's followed by the 7 principles and the 6 sources. And it ends with, quote, "Grateful for the religious pluralism which enriches and ennobles our faith, we are inspired to deepen our understanding and expand our vision. As free congregations, we enter into this covenant, promising to one another our mutual trust and support." End quote. Isn't that nice? Early Unitarian congregations hammered out their covenants one at a time, sometimes plagiarizing, sometimes coming up with their own words, but in thoughtful conversations. Those respectful listening and sharing conversations were not only a way to shape the covenant, but that was a way to practice the covenant as they were making it. It's the richest part of our New England heritage because the Boston Congregationalists and the Massachusetts Unitarians and the Rhode Island Roger Williams Baptists, not too similar to most of the Baptists we know, they all understood that democracy was a theological principle, not just a handy way of setting the rules. Robert's rules have their place, but they're adversarial. They set something up and start an argument. Covenanted democracy is consensual. We try to reach agreement. It calls for getting to agreement while embracing as much diversity as we can manage. Like most UU congregations, we have a covenant that we recite every week in the closing circle. It's one adaptation of a covenant that has taken many forms. When I preach in Franklin, we say things differently, about 3 or 4 words that they've changed. And we're even now in the process of tweaking some of the words and getting your input, because that's part of covenant, is inviting you to participate in decisions. That Sunday morning covenant is mainly about how we are to be together. But then it has to be fleshed out by bylaws that help us to maintain order while engaging in those conversations, which range from the budget to calling a minister or hanging a Black Lives Matter banner or acknowledging and resolving conflict or expressing our own deepest beliefs and yearnings. When new members join a congregation, it's almost never said that they're subscribing to a covenant that is grounded in our mission and spelled out in our bylaws. Maybe they should be told that. Bylaws do not tell us how to treat each other. Covenants often do. Bylaws are just the tip of the iceberg. It's the rest of the iceberg that sank the Titanic. Under the surface of our ocean are not just the undercurrents of disagreement that divide us, but also the unifying, sometimes written, sometimes unspoken covenants to arrive at decisions by thoughtful deliberation, listening, seeking common ground, and trusting the good intentions of others. Democracy was bubbling up in Europe even as the colonies developed their own self-government. But it was North America that offered an opportunity for a fresh start, both religiously and politically. Those Puritans eased up within a couple of generations when they realized that their kids were not quite as intense about these beliefs and this particular way of living and understanding the Bible, and they still wanted them to be part of the church. So it didn't last very long. New England democracy, from town meeting to covenanted congregation, drew on the philosophy of John Locke and the Scottish Enlightenment to shape first the Declaration of Independence, which was signed by at least one Universalist, then the Articles of Confederation, and finally the Constitution. All these covenants gave concrete form to how we walk together, resolve differences, and, to quote the Constitution, secure the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity. We do best when we focus on what unites us rather than divides us, affirming our common ground, our faith in the goodness of people, and our trust in the process, specifically the process embodied in the Constitution. So, in just 2 days, we UUs and a whole lot of other people get to take our religious values of freedom, tolerance, and reason to the polls and participate in the sacred ritual of voting that affirms those values. Some churches tell their members who to vote for. We don't. Sometimes we can't, but we try not to. We just tell you that voting is your duty, your privilege, and your covenanted obligation to your city, your state, and your nation. Beyond the polling place every day, or at least every week, we need to remind one another of the covenant that holds us together as congregations, as people in a free church tradition. In a time of turmoil, tribalism, incivility, and looming threats to our future from climate change and financial recklessness, our calm, steady affirmation of the role of reason, tolerance, and freedom is needed more now than ever. Whether we believe in God or just in each other, we share gratitude for this rich heritage of covenant and democracy, and we are called to renew our commitment to practice it and pass it on. May it be so.